These are America's real gates to hell. Picture a rusted iron gate rising from red clay at the edge of a forgotten county road where the air tastes of cold metal and old rain, where the trees breathe like living things and even the crickets fall silent. Tonight, we go inside that phrase to trace actual places across the United States where locals, records, and a troubling string of eyewitness accounts point to thresholds people still avoid. We will name the spots, listen to the people who lived near them, examine municipal files and newspaper clippings, and try to separate folklore from persistent anomaly. I looked through county archives, dusted off microfilm at the State Historical Library, and interviewed neighbors who still keep flashlights on their porches. Stay with me while we map the gates, read the records, and ask why whole communities speak of boundaries that seem to answer back. The stories do not agree on details. Some neighbors swear a gate appeared after a mining accident. Others insist it was a landlord's private sculpture that callers report seeing at 2 in the morning. I gathered testimony, police logs, and old articles to see where the threads cross and where they unravel. You will hear voices from the road, see documents scanned from the Gazette, and meet people who say they turned away because something at the threshold was not just an empty space. The forest at the first site seems to hold its breath around the gate, and that breath is where our investigation begins. The earliest mentions we found come from small-town papers and county ledgers, and they are messy. One version, reported in the 1938 edition of the Jefferson Gazette, records a farmer's letter describing an iron structure that appeared near the old quarry after a lightning storm. Another version appears in a 1951 human interest column suggesting teenage pranks and theatrical props left over from a traveling show. Both versions have echoes in later decades. A 1974 police log in Baker County lists calls about cars stalling near a narrow bridge and citizens who claim to have seen metal bars appear where there had been only trees earlier. In the State Historical Library, I read a typed affidavit from 1989 where a postal worker named Ruth Bennett described a gate emerging in fog and then vanishing when she tried to approach. At the same time, the county property records show no construction permits for any of these gates. Which raises a question, and a familiar one in folklore studies: do objects appear because people tell about them, or do they inspire the stories people tell? Newspapers offer record and rumor. A 1940 fire report mentions a collapsed trestle near the canyon, and an obituary in the Gazette records a disappearance of a young logger. Local oral history compiled in a 2002 pamphlet lists a series of warnings posted by sheriffs through the decades, sometimes as late as the 1990s. Here we begin. Have two competing strands: a physical record of accidents and disappearances, and a living oral tradition that fills the gaps with a gate that tempts drivers or pedestrians to cross. The split between these sources is where our team decided to start visiting the first site and hearing testimony in person. The first gate we visited sits off Route 19, near a place locals call Devil's Hollow, and arriving there is sensory in a way that makes a person think twice. The gravel crunches underfoot with a sound like broken glass. The scent of damp iron mixes with wild thyme and diesel. The air is cool against the skin, and there is a metallic tang on the tongue. Fog curls low between oak trunks, and an old iron gate leans against a stone pillar as if abandoned mid-motion. Sarah Jennings, who runs the bait shop a half-mile away, told us what she saw. We sat on plastic chairs under a faded awning, and she folded her hands, voice low. Sarah said, "I was leaving at midnight. I slowed down, and there it was, a gate I had never seen. I rolled down my window and could hear a humming like electricity, but the radio was clear." She rubbed her forearm as if remembering cold. I asked, "Did you get out of the car?" She answered, "I did, but I did not cross." Then, Officer Tom Alvarez, who responded to calls there in the 1980s, described the scene in a voice that mixed duty and fatigue. He said, "We taped the area, took pictures. The metal had no identifying marks, no rust where it should." Then, a neighbor named Lena Ortiz, who lives 3 doors down, recited a different detail. She said, "I smelled roses the night I walked close. Roses and something sharp underneath, like pennies." There is a woman named Ruth Bennett on file, and she confirmed by phone a sighting in 1989. Our small team documented 5 sensory details at the gate that recur in different accounts: cool air, metallic scent, a humming sound, visual flicker in headlights, and an odor like flowers or decay. Each of these details appears in interviews or in written testimonies preserved at the county clerk's office. We then opened the files and encountered contradictions that force a listener to consider more mundane explanations. Dr. Emily Carter, an environmental analyst, reviewed soil tests and told us that underground coal seams can produce low-frequency infrasound and gas emissions that cause nausea and optical distortions. In an interview, she explained, "Infrasound can make people feel dread and see movement that is not there." We asked hard questions to people who had the data. Harold Finch, a retired structural engineer, examined the gate photographs and noted inconsistencies in scale and shadow. He said, "The shadows in these photos do not match sunlight angles from that hour, and the edges look blurred like double exposure." Yet, the police logs still show calls, and the Gazette printed a follow-up in 1979, quoting witnesses who declined to be named. Then Marcus Doyle, an independent investigator who spent a summer living near Devil's Hollow, argued the anomalies were not just perceptual. He said, "We recorded electromagnetic spikes on 3 nights, and the next morning a tree had been bent in a way no storm could do." Dr. Carter replied, "That could be local geology." Marcus answered, "Maybe. But geology does not explain people who refuse to go near the place months after incidents stopped." This back and forth shows us the tension between natural explanations documented by experts and persistent human experiences that resist straightforward categorization. The third location in our series brought us to an old canyon road in the west known locally as Gatekeeper's Bend, and here community memory is thick and public. Pastor Michael Green, who presided over funerals there for 25 years, told us that families forbade late-night travel on that road. He said, "We put out candles once, not for God, but because people were afraid to drive through." In a small diner near the canyon, owner's wife Ruth used to warn teenagers away. Lena Ortiz, who grew up nearby, told a theater-quality anecdote about children playing hide-and-seek and a gate that appeared at dusk and then closed with a sound like 1,000 coins. Sarah Jennings mentioned a school bus driver named Evelyn who called her in the early 1990s to report lights over the canyon that made instruments fail. We recorded voices from 5 named members of the community: Pastor Michael Green, Marcus Doyle, Sarah Jennings, Ruth Bennett, Lena Ortiz, and Officer Tom Alvarez, plus others who provide texture. Witnesses described scents, dust and sage smoke, sound like a muted bell, sight of a gate glowing faintly at the edge of vision, taste of copper in the mouth, and a skin sensation like someone breathing at the neck. These local narratives create social rules: stay away after sundown, avoid certain mile markers, and respect warning signs because crosses and handwritten notes appeared over decades. The social function is clear. The Gabe legend enforces boundaries and protects people, and in doing so, it becomes more than a story. We synthesize the evidence by weighing natural processes against social amplification. Records show accidents, missing persons cases, and geological oddities near every site we examined. Technical explanations include methane pockets, infrasound, and optical illusions created by temperature inversions. For example, a county geological survey mentions subterranean voids capable of releasing gases, and a 1998 engineering memorandum outlines how light through fog can create mirrored images that look like metallic structures. Yet none of these documents fully account for repeated reports of discrete metal gates that appear at consistent coordinates, and that prompt similar ritualized responses from neighbors across generations. Comparing these sites with other American gate legends, like the reputed portal under a Kentucky music hall or the Seven Gates of Trom, a rural East Coast road shows a pattern. Folklorists call this pattern a boundary myth, objects that safeguard social memory and regulate behavior in ambiguous spaces. The comparison suggests that material anomalies concede a story, which then accrues detail until the community's memory and the physical place are entwined. A month after our initial visit, local officials posted a simple sign asking people to stay out. 3 months later, a team of graduate students from the state university recorded anomalies in audio files that they emailed to our team. 6 months on, civic volunteers had cleared underbrush and installed a small plaque listing historical incidents culled from the Gazette and county court records. The epilogue is not tidy. Some gates seem to vanish as public attention increases, others become more visible when a grandchild hears a story and decides to look. What remains constant are human reactions to thresholds, the polite rituals of avoidance, and the stories that teach them. We must admit that some of what we encountered has plausible physical explanations, and some of it resists those explanations and sits stubborn in testimony. I interviewed Marcus Doyle at dusk and asked what he believes. He said, "Whether it is a hole in the earth or the hole in our courage, it does not matter. The gate marks a place where we feel watched." That sentence captures why these places matter. They are at once physical locations and vessels for collective fear. If you have a story like this, please leave a comment starting with the words "I saw" and include where it is and what happened. We read every submission and follow leads when names or newspaper clippings are provided. Your reports help us check archives and sometimes lead to roads we would not find on our own. In closing, remember those opening images: a rusted gate, a cold breath, a humming in the dark. Between county records and human memory, there is overlap and contradiction, and both matter. These gates tell us as much about geology and wind as they do about how communities guard themselves against the unknown. 1 month after our fieldwork, local police had logged one more call from a driver who described a gate and then drove away. 3 months later, a historical society scanned additional articles that corroborated a 1940 collapse near a canyon. 6 months later, volunteers had replaced a faded warning sign, and a new generation of teenagers dared each other to stand at the marker and take a picture, because we cannot resist thresholds. If this story unsettled you, consider subscribing for deeper reports where we publish original documents and interviews, and keep looking. Tell us where you would want us to go next and whether you think these gates are natural, made, or something else entirely. And remember, some doors remain closed for a reason.